My friends, let us enter this hour with a deep breath of stillness, not the stillness that comes from effort, but the stillness that comes when we simply stop reaching outward for God and allow ourselves to rest in the presence that is already here. For too long, the world has prayed to a God somewhere else. It has called into the heavens, pleaded with the skies, begged for answers, hoped for intervention, and yet the great truth revealed by the Master and confirmed again and again through spiritual realization is that God is not a distant being to be summoned. God is not a reluctant presence to be persuaded. God is the very life of our being, the very substance of our consciousness, the invisible presence that fills all space. If our prayer begins with the assumption that God is somewhere else, then no matter how sincere our words, we remain in a state of separation. And separation, this belief that God is there and we are here, is the only barrier to spiritual realization. This is why so many prayers feel unanswered. It is not that God withholds anything from us, but that we have not yet awakened to the place where God already is. The Father does not move toward us. Rather, we awaken to the Father who has never left us for a single moment in this hour. Let us release that old habit of pleading. Let us lay aside the emotional strain we have mistaken for spirituality. Let us allow the ancient idea of a distant God to fall away, for it never had reality. What we seek is not a God who responds to our words, but a God who is revealed in our silence. We are not here to improve prayer. We are here to discover an entirely different dimension of prayer, a prayer that does not ask, does not demand, does not attempt to change the outer scene, but a prayer that rests, listens, and awakens to the kingdom that has always been within. This is the beginning, a quiet turning, a willingness to see differently, a willingness to recognize that the presence we once sought with effort is the presence that has never ceased to live as our very life. And as we move forward, this realization will open a door that no human struggle could ever open, a door into the kingdom that is not approached through words, but through awareness. As we continue, let us look gently and honestly at the form of prayer the world has practiced for centuries. It is a prayer born of fear, shaped by desperation, and carried by the belief that life consists of two powers, good and evil, spirit and matter, God and something that opposes God. Whenever we plead for God to intervene, we are declaring, without realizing it, that there is some other power at work, some force capable of harming us unless God steps in to counteract it. This, my friends, is the fundamental mistake that makes prayer a burden rather than a revelation. The mind that begs is a mind convinced that it stands outside the kingdom. It imagines itself vulnerable, struggling, alone, calling into a great silence and hoping that somewhere in the vastness of heaven a hearing ear will take notice. But the Master called this the prayer of the Gentiles, the prayer of those who think they shall be heard for their much speaking. And Goldsmith, through long years of prayer and healing work, recognized it for what it is, a cry without foundation, a cry without spiritual substance, a bootless cry. It is not wrong. It is simply ineffective because it attempts to reach a God who is not absent. It asks for help from a presence already present. It labors to attract what cannot be separated from us. And because of this, it never brings the peace we seek. People pray with tremendous emotion. They cry out with sincerity. They repeat words with intensity, yet beneath all of it is the hidden assumption God is somewhere else, and I must get his attention. Let us understand this clearly. Whenever we believe we must persuade God to act, we are not praying to the infinite presence, but to an image created by human thought. The one and only God needs no persuasion. The one and only presence requires no convincing. God is not moved by our fear, nor by our volume, nor by our repetition. God is God eternally I as. When Jesus said, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask," he was not comforting us, he was correcting our entire idea of prayer. And so the old way must be recognized for what it is: a sincere attempt to reach God made out of the false belief that God is far off. But sincerity does not change illusion. If the foundation is separation, the prayer remains separation, no matter how devoted the seeker may be. It is not the heart that is mistaken, it is the concept of God we inherited without questioning. In this moment, let us gently release the notion that God must be summoned, awakened, or convinced. Let us understand that whenever we plead, we are turning toward a God who does not exist. The one true God is not reached by supplication, but by recognition. And when we grasp this, we take the first real step out of the old form of prayer and into the consciousness where prayer becomes revelation. Now let us turn to the Master's own instruction, for Jesus did not merely teach prayer, he revealed the nature of God, and if we fail to understand his revelation, we will continue speaking words into the air instead of entering the divine presence. He came to unveil. When Jesus said, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask," he was not giving us comfort. He was dismantling the entire structure of human prayer. He was saying, in the clearest possible language, that God is not informed by you, is not moved by you, and is not dependent upon your request in order to act. This is why he also said, "The kingdom of God is within you." The kingdom is not attained through petition. It is realized through recognition. The Father is not somewhere beyond the clouds, nor in the distant heavens we imagine, nor seated in the sky waiting for our cries to reach some divine threshold. The Father is the very life that animates us, the very presence that breathes us, the very consciousness in which we appear. And because of this, Jesus could say, "I and the Father are one," not as a theological claim, but as a simple statement of spiritual fact. Joel Goldsmith understood this deeply. He saw that Jesus was not teaching us how to get God to act. He was teaching us how to realize that God is already acting. He was not showing us how to persuade God to come near. He was showing us how to awaken to the nearness that never leaves. Every time Jesus healed, he did so from the awareness of one presence, never two. He did not battle disease, nor confront demons, nor fight conditions. He simply recognized God as the only power, and the appearance of a second power dissolved in that recognition. And my friends, this is why his prayer was a silent prayer. He withdrew. He entered the secret place. He listened. He communed. He knew. He did not ask the Father to heal. He did not implore God to intervene. He rested in the Father's presence until the truth revealed itself, and the outer picture aligned with the inner realization, "Your Father knows." Let those words sink deeply. Your Father knows. There is nothing you can ask God that God does not already know. Your Father knows. Before the thought arises, the provision is present. Before the need is felt, the fulfillment exists. Before the fear appears, the assurance stands. We ask because we do not yet recognize the completeness of God's presence. We ask because human sense has convinced us that something is missing. We ask because we assume lack where only fullness exists. But Jesus did not ask. He recognized, and in that recognition, the kingdom became visible wherever he stood. This is the prayer we must learn, the prayer that does not inform God, but unveils God, the prayer that does not attempt to draw God near, but awakens us to the presence that has never been absent. This was the Master's teaching, and this is the path Goldsmith walked, that prayer is not words spoken to God, but consciousness awakened to God. Let us now move into the heart of this unfolding, the point at which prayer ceases to be an effort and becomes a realization, for the great barrier to spiritual vision is not the world, nor circumstance, nor even the fears we carry. It is the mind's fixation on the problem. As long as the mind clings to what appears as lack, as sickness, as conflict, it is looking at shadows and calling them reality. And no matter how often we speak to God about these shadows, they do not dissolve, because the act of speaking to God about them is itself an affirmation that the shadows have substance. This is what Goldsmith meant when he said that the human mind lives in problem consciousness. It approaches God through the doorway of fear rather than the doorway of truth. It begins with the problem and tries to bring God to it. It says, Lord, here is my need. Lord, here is my pain. Lord, here is my crisis. But every such approach assumes that the problem has power, that the condition has reality, that the circumstance is something God must overcome. And the moment we give it that power, we place ourselves outside the kingdom. For the kingdom cannot be entered through fear. It cannot be entered through struggle. It cannot be entered by attempting to improve the picture that the senses present. The kingdom is realized only when the mind lets go of the appearance long enough to turn toward the invisible presence that stands behind every appearance. And so there must be a shift, a turning, a quiet surrender of attention. Instead of beginning with the problem, we begin with God. Instead of asking for change, we recognize the changeless. Instead of wrestling with appearances, we release them from our concern and acknowledge that God alone is the substance of all experience. You see, there are two states of awareness available to us at every moment. One is problem consciousness, in which we believe that something stands apart from God and must be corrected. The other is presence consciousness, in which we realize that God is the only presence and therefore nothing needs to be corrected, only seen rightly. This shift is subtle, almost imperceptible to the ego, but it is the entire secret of prayer. For when you rest in presence consciousness, fear dissolves of itself. Anxiety loses its foundation. The appearance begins to fade, not because you forced it to change, but because you no longer grant it power. You have withdrawn your belief in a second presence. Let me speak plainly. If you bring the problem into prayer, you are still outside the kingdom. If you leave the problem outside the door and enter with nothing but recognition of God, you are within the kingdom already. This is why Jesus could speak with such authority. He did not see two powers. He did not meet a blind man and see blindness. He met the presence of God and recognized it as the only reality. The blindness yielded to the vision, not because he demanded a change, but because he refused to acknowledge anything but God as the substance of the man before him. And we, too, must learn this holy shift when a difficulty arises. Our first impulse must no longer be to rush toward the difficulty, but to turn inward to the quiet center where God is already present, already complete, already the only power in that turning. In that shift, prayer begins not as petition, but as realization, and as we learn to dwell here, the outer world begins to reflect the inner vision. The problem dissolves in the light of presence consciousness, just as darkness dissolves when the sun rises. It is not battled, it is simply outshone. Now, let us take this teaching from concept to living experience, for truth that remains only in the mind has not yet touched the heart. And spiritual realization is not an intellectual achievement, it is a state of being. So for a few moments, I invite you to lay aside the problem, the request, the agenda, the desire for any particular outcome. Let us, for this brief interval, approach God without words, without demands, without the slightest attempt to shape what should happen next. This, my friends, is the doorway to the kingdom. Inner stillness without petition. The mind will try to ask, but we do not follow it. The emotions will try to rise, but we do not cling to them. Thoughts will attempt to form prayers, but we release them gently, like a leaf drifting on water. Let us enter now into what Goldsmith called the silence of recognition, not the silence of effort, not a silence created by pushing thoughts aside, but a silence that reveals itself when we no longer chase after thought. In this silence, we are not seeking God, we are resting in God. We are not calling out to the infinite, we are allowing the infinite to reveal itself. And so we begin with a simple awareness. God is here, not coming, not arriving, not approaching from a distance. Here, right where you are, in the very space you occupy. God is the life of your life, the breath within your breath, the consciousness in which every thought appears and disappears. Do not try to feel this. Do not strain to experience anything. Simply acknowledge it as truth, just as Jesus acknowledged it. Allow the statement to stand in you, God is here. Now, notice how the mind tries to bring the problem back into the room. Notice how it tries to say, yes, but what about? And each time it does, gently let it go. We are not answering the mind. We are not reasoning with it. We are not correcting it. We are turning away from it. Rest again in that simple awareness. One presence, one power, one life, one law. There are not two powers warring within you. There is only God expressing, only God being, only God unfolding. As we rest in this awareness, the problem dissolves, not because the outer condition has changed, but because we have withdrawn our belief from the appearance. We have refused to give it the status of a reality separate from God. And in that refusal, we enter the realm. Jesus called the kingdom the state of consciousness in which God alone is seen as the substance of all that is. This is prayer. This is true communion. This is the beginning of spiritual realization. You may notice a softening within you, or a quietness that seems to deepen from within. You may notice nothing at all. Either is fine. For the work is not emotional. The work is awareness. The very act of turning inward without petition is the opening of the inner door. The very willingness to rest without asking is the touching of the kingdom. Remain here for a moment, just being. No requests, no effort, only recognition. And let this truth anchor itself in your consciousness. The kingdom is entered not by words, but by awareness, not by asking, but by knowing, not by striving, but by resting in the presence that has always been here. As you practice this, even for a few seconds throughout your day, you will begin to sense a new dimension of being arising from within you, a presence that is not your thinking mind, not your emotions, not your effort, but the living activity of God realized in consciousness. And this, beloved friends, is the first true step into kingdom conscious living. Now, having touched the silence, let us bring this awareness into the movements of daily living. For spiritual realization must not remain confined to moments of meditation. It must become the atmosphere of our entire life. The true test of this path is not how deeply we enter the silence in the quiet hour, but how consistently we return to it in the midst of activity, conflict, responsibility, and decision. For the moment we rise from meditation, the world begins presenting its appearances. A message arrives, a bill is due, a sharp word is spoken, a memory surfaces, a physical sensation makes itself known, and instantly, almost automatically, the old habit returns. We reach outward, we tense inward, we prepare to face the problem as if it possesses power of its own. This is the subtle temptation to step back into problem consciousness, to treat the appearance as something real, something powerful, something separate from God. And with that shift, our prayer becomes a plea again. We find ourselves asking, God, help me with this. God, fix this. God, change this. And without realizing it, we have stepped out of the kingdom and back into the belief of two powers. But let us understand this with great tenderness. The appearance is not the danger. The appearance is only the mirror in which we see whether we are living from the kingdom or from fear. Every circumstance that confronts us becomes an invitation. Will I see God here, or will I believe in something else? Therefore, in the midst of daily life, the practice is simple. The moment a disturbance arises before the mind begins its old reactions, you pause. Just a pause. A sacred interval in which you do not engage the appearance. And in that pause, you make a quiet recognition. God is here, not God will be here, not God must come here, not God should fix this. God is here already, fully, completely. Make no attempt to correct the appearance. Make no attempt to understand it or solve it. Your work is not to heal the condition. Your work is to realize the presence. And when the presence is realized, the condition adjusts itself to the new vision. If a person confronts you harshly, do not react from the personal sense of self that feels injured or defensive. In that very moment, inwardly recognize the same presence that lives as me lives as this one. The outer behavior may still need a practical response, but the consciousness with which you respond will no longer be fear, resentment, or judgment. You will speak from the kingdom, not from the world. If a financial concern arises, resist the impulse to plead for help, turn inward, and acknowledge supply is not out there, the source is here, where God is. And stay in that recognition long enough for the fear to dissolve, not because the numbers change, but because your awareness returned to the presence. If a physical sensation troubles you, do not begin by resisting it or fearing it. Begin with the same recognition. God, the one, life, fills all space, including this very body. You are not declaring something to become true. You are acknowledging what is eternally true. This practice, this turning, this recognition may take only a few seconds, but those few seconds keep you anchored in the kingdom while the world pulls at your senses. And if you do this many times throughout the day, something profound happens. The kingdom becomes your automatic response. You stop begging God because the thought to beg no longer arises. You stop fearing appearances because you no longer believe they have power. And gradually, the outer circumstances of life begin to reflect the inner atmosphere of peace, not because you manipulated the outer world, but because you no longer live from the belief that the outer world governs you. This is the way we carry the kingdom into every moment. This is how the presence consciousness of meditation becomes the presence consciousness of living. As we walk further into this path, we must recognize that the journey into spiritual realization is not without resistance, not the resistance of the world, not the resistance of other people, but the resistance of what Goldsmith called personal sense, the conditioned identity that believes it lives apart from God. This personal sense is not an enemy, it is simply a mental habit born of ages in which humanity believed it was separate, vulnerable, and self-sufficient. And so when you begin to rest in the awareness of one presence, one power, one life, personal sense becomes unsettled. It cannot survive in the light of truth, and therefore it clings to the shadows. You will notice this resistance in many forms. There are moments when fear rises quickly, as if to reclaim its authority. Moments when doubt whispers, "This cannot be enough." Moments when the mind tries to drag you back to the appearance, insisting, "Deal with this first, then you can seek God." These are not signs that you are failing. These are signs that the personal self is losing its ground. Personal sense depends upon the belief in two powers. It lives by judging appearances, by reacting to circumstances, by protecting itself against imagined threats. When you begin to dwell in the awareness of one power, personal sense feels as though its identity is dissolving, and in truth it is. But this dissolution is not death, it is liberation. The self that dissolves is not your true self. It is only the mask you have worn. So when resistance arises, understand this. Nothing has gone wrong. You have not fallen from grace. You have not lost your spiritual footing. You are simply witnessing the old consciousness trying to maintain its claim upon you. It may say, "Your hurt is real. Your fear is justified. Your grievance must be preserved." But these voices are echoes, not truth. They belong to the realm of material sense, not spiritual awareness. The important thing is this: do not fight the resistance. To fight it is to give it substance. To argue with it is to keep it alive. To condemn yourself for experiencing it is to strengthen the very illusion you are trying to transcend. Instead, recognize it for what it is, the last grasping movements of an identity that never had reality in God. When the mind says, "This situation is too serious for silence," you do not debate it. You simply turn inward again and whisper, "God is here." When the emotions say, "You must protect yourself," you do not resist them. You rest again in the truth. There is only one power. When guilt or shame tries to arise, telling you that you are unworthy of God's presence, you do not argue. You recognize, "God is the life of me. Therefore, I am already whole." Every return to presence weakens the grip of personal sense. Every moment of recognition undermines the illusion of separation. Every quiet acknowledgement of God dissolves another layer of fear. And slowly, gently, The resistance begins to fade, not because you conquered it, but because you refuse to grant it reality. You have lifted your consciousness above the plane where personal sense operates. You have entered the dimension where only God is recognized as the substance of being, and in that altitude, fear cannot breathe. In time, you will see that resistance itself becomes a teacher. Each moment of contraction becomes an invitation to return. Each moment of fear becomes a doorway into truth. Each moment of doubt becomes a reminder to rest again in the presence that never leaves. And thus, what once felt like an obstacle becomes a guide. What once felt like interference becomes instruction. What once felt like conflict becomes the very path to peace. For in the kingdom, even resistance serves your awakening. As we deepen into this practice, let us now consider what it means to live in continuous recognition. For the kingdom is not a momentary experience. It is not something we enter for 5 minutes in meditation and then abandon as we return to the world. The kingdom is a state of consciousness, an inner atmosphere, a way of seeing that accompanies us everywhere. Into the home, into the workplace, into conversations, into silence, into conflict, into rest. And the great secret is this: it is not sustained by effort, it is sustained by remembrance. In the beginning, recognition feels deliberate. You pause intentionally. You turn within. You remind yourself, God is the only presence here. But as you continue in this path, something begins to change. The recognition becomes spontaneous. It arises before you think to call upon it. Like the breath, like the heartbeat, it becomes an activity of your being. And this is what Goldsmith meant by inner communion. Not an act you perform, but a state you inhabit. Let us be clear, this is not achieved by forcing the mind to remain spiritual. It is not achieved by vigilantly policing your thoughts. It is not achieved by perfection of outer behavior. Inner communion arises naturally when you return to it often. A few seconds here, a quiet breath there, a gentle acknowledgement in passing. Each one builds the consciousness in which God becomes your first awareness instead of your last resort. And so the practice is beautifully simple. As you move through your day, pause often, not long, not strained, not intense, just often. In those small pauses, recognize God is here. No more than that. In the grocery store, while you wait in line, God is here. In the midst of a disagreement, God is here. While driving, while washing dishes, while answering an email, God is here. Do not try to feel anything. Do not try to produce a spiritual sensation. Simply recognize what is already true. These brief recognitions keep your consciousness anchored in the invisible, the real, the eternal, and every time you return to this awareness, you are aligning yourself with the kingdom. You will find that in moments of need, the recognition comes before the fear does. When someone speaks harshly, the presence rises in you before anger can take root. When a sudden change occurs, the calm awareness appears before panic can form. When a decision is required, intuition arises from within before the mind begins weighing the arguments. This is the fruit of inner communion. It is not mystical in the dramatic sense. It is mystical in the quiet sense. It is the still, small voice becoming the dominant voice. It is the awareness of God becoming more real than the appearance of the world. And as this becomes your way of being, you will discover something profound. You no longer seek God. You no longer attempt to reach God. You no longer look for signs that God is at work. Instead, you move through life in the knowing that God is the only life present. You walk into situations not hoping for divine help, but carrying divine consciousness with you. This is how healings occur without words. This is how harmony unfolds without effort. This is how supply appears without anxiety. Not because you have mastered a technique, but because your consciousness has shifted from separation to union, from fear to presence, from the outer world to the inner kingdom. And the more you rest in this communion, the more natural it becomes. Prayer becomes awareness. Awareness becomes peace. Peace becomes your state of being, and your state of being becomes a light to others. Whether or not you speak a word, for continuous recognition is not merely for your benefit. It becomes a blessing that radiates through every life you touch. And now, as we bring this hour of contemplation to its gentle close, let us gather the thread that has woven itself through every moment of our time together. We have not come here to learn how to persuade God, nor to refine the old habits of petition, nor to strengthen the mind's belief that something stands apart from the infinite. We have come for a single purpose: to awaken to the presence that has always been with us, within us, as us, the presence that requires no voice to hear, no distance to travel, no ritual to awaken, the presence that is the kingdom itself. In this stillness we have touched, we begin to understand that nothing can truly be added to us, and nothing essential can be taken away. The Father knows, the Father is, and the Father, this infinite, boundless presence, is closer than breath, nearer than thought, more intimate than our own sense of self. When we rest in this awareness, prayer ceases to be something we perform and becomes something we live. Prayer becomes realization, realization becomes communion, and communion becomes our way of being in the world. Do not think that you must maintain this perfectly. Perfection belongs to God, not to our human sense of striving. Your task is not to stay in the presence every second, but simply to return whenever you remember. The return is the practice. The return is the victory. The return is the awakening. Each gentle turning inward builds the consciousness in which fear subsides, appearances lose their authority, and God becomes the foundation of your perception. As you leave this moment and re-enter the activities of the day, carry with you one simple truth: God is here. Let it meet you in the doorway. Let it rise in you at the sound of a phone call. Let it rest upon you in moments of silence. Let it stand with you when the world presents its appearances. And each time you recognize it, you are not calling forth something new. You are remembering something eternal. This is the great call. Remain in the presence. Return to the presence. Rest in the presence. For in this resting, the kingdom becomes visible, and the life you live becomes the life of God expressed. May each moment ahead be a moment of quiet recognition, and may this recognition reveal to you what has always been so. You are never separate. You are never alone. You are never without the fullness of God's infinite being.